In case you haven't noticed, I'm something of a Detective Conan fan. In just the span of a year, it became my top second favorite manga series of all time. I mean, I like this series so much that I started collecting the original Japanese volumes. I just like the way they look. Even though I'd like to say that this is one of the easiest stories to enjoy, there's something that just stops me from confidently recommending DC whenever I happen to bring it up in conversation. Not that it happens that often, but Detective Conan is really long. Like, One Piece levels of long. Even being slightly longer than One Piece levels of long. And it got me thinking, is it possible to streamline Detective Conan's story so that I can skip through any standalone case that doesn't contribute to the main storyline in any way, shape, or form? And so I did exactly what I just described. I would also like to add some context. Throughout the video, I'll be referring to some of the chapters found in DC as filler. I'm aware that I will be using that word incorrectly throughout this video, and it's become incredibly engraved into the video already that I can't really take out the phrase. That being said, I'll fix that in future videos, and you might even notice me taking out the phrase as this video goes on. I know manga titles are relatively shorter than the shows that adapt them into a 25-minute runtime, but even the DC manga has a few filler chapters here and there. And yeah, I could always look online for an existing guide, but I want to make this series shorter based on my own findings. Otherwise, this really wouldn't be a video worth making. At least this time I won't end up sounding like the fourth missing member of Alvin and the Chipmunks. Another reason I'm solely dissecting the manga is that for English-speaking fans who don't want to sail the seven seas, the only other alternatives to the manga are Crunchyroll and Tubi, the former only having a handful of the later episodes, and the latter having a now inaccessible dub that they themselves licensed. Meaning that the Case Closed manga is sadly the most easily accessible version of the story. So for those who are mildly interested in giving Conan a chance but feel overwhelmed by the volume count, I'd like to offer you this little PNG. This will serve as a comprehensive and spoiler-free guide to what is and isn't important to read. You'll be able to find this in my Blue Sky posts, which I'll also link in the description. Be sure to give me a follow on there for more of these updates if you wanna. And yes, this is how DC is structured in every volume. At first, I thought this was a Viz Media change, but looking at the Japanese volumes, this was not the case. Every volume categorizes each chapter from 1 to 10 or 11, no matter if their proper numbering is 500 or 300, etc. Now, I'll admit, this guide is mainly for those who seek to buy the volumes physically or read the series digitally. But don't worry, I have made an alternate guide for those who want to sail the seven seas if you really want to, or if you're reading the series through Viz Media's website or their newest manga app that both name the chapters normally. This is where I'd like for new readers to stop watching because I'm gonna spend the rest of the video explaining why I deem certain chapters skippable or not, along with any general opinions I may have concerning the volumes I'm covering. That being said, I wholeheartedly recommend giving this series a chance if you think it's up your alley. Wait, something's not right. Oh, that's better. Okay, now that they're gone, I'll be discussing volumes 1 through 10. More on that right now. As the very first book of the series, Volume 1 is pretty much unskippable. Not only does it show how great of a detective Shinichi is, but it also showcases his first few adventures as Conan at Ogawa, coming to terms with how high the tables have been stacked against him, despite coming out the other end with his high school intellect. This also marks the beginning of Ran and Shinichi's romance subplot, which persists throughout the series, making any case that contains this sub-story unskippable. It also starts the trend of Professor Agasa inventing a ton of gadgets for Shinichi to use during his investigations, helping him find his bearings as Conan and making the sleeping Kogoro act possible with his newly added voice modulating bow tie, making the entirety of Volume 1 unskippable. The same can be said for Volume 2, where we see Agasa invent more gadgets for Conan to utilize, such as the super sneakers that he uses to kick a tire into a homicidal company president's face, the homing glasses and transmitter stick he used to find a young high school girl's father, and the stretchy suspenders, by far the most underutilized gadget in the series. The pile begins, along with introducing Genta, Mitsuhiko, and Aoyumi, who'd become Conan's trouble hunting buddies. This volume also showcases the second appearance of the two men in black, who kill their other member despite successfully holding her end of the bargain in return for her younger sister's freedom, a death that motivates Conan to continue his hunt. His next problem appears via Ayumi, Genta, and Mitsuhiku, who always look for trouble during this period of the series, usually dragging Conan along with them, who then has to keep the kids out of danger when things escalate. It's kind of funny how out of character both Genta and Mitsuhiku feel when compared to later appearances. Mitsuhiku is all for science and not believing in the supernatural, while Genta is extremely aggressive towards anyone who questions literally anything he says. They definitely feel like they're completely different characters at this point, such as Mitsuhiku, who Aoyama tweaked ever so slightly so that his personality could match the voice given to him by Ikue Otani, better known as the voice of Pikachu. I'm getting off topic, so volume 3. Another case of a full volume completely unskippable. This volume is taken up by two cases, the Hatamoto family cruise case and the strange gift case. At first glance, these two seem like very incidental mysteries, but they both factor into the world building of Detective Conan. Here we see the first of numerous uses of the stun gun wristwatch, which Conan will frequently use on Kogoro, and soon many others. The second is where Ron begins connecting the dots, concluding that Conan and Shinichi are one and the same. But thanks to the help of Agasa, Conan manages to convince her otherwise, becoming one of the many ways in which Conan keeps Ron from discovering his true identity. There's actually not that many examples in the manga. Technically, the first quarter of this volume is skippable. You can skip the Armored Knight case if you want, but I'd argue that doing so damages the world building. Obviously not every filler case is going to have a hint of information about the main story, but these cases serve to build up Kogoro's reputation as a great detective who cracks tough mysteries in a weird sleep-like trance or something. We also get to see the two men in black again. Thankfully, they do not recognize Shinichi in his current form, allowing him to bug their seats, discover their code names, and stop the bomb they placed on the train in order to take care of a now useless contractor. At one point, Conan nearly tells Ron who he is to get her off his back, before figuring out who had the briefcase with the bomb in it. Ron brings this up back in the next case, but Conan manages to slide out of the topic. I guess you could skip this case, especially since there's no involvement with the men in black, but like Kogoro's cases, the kids' cases are just as important, with this being one of the first instances where the four begin to really work as a team, and where Conan starts feeling like the leader of the group. This also marks ground zero of Genta and Mitsuhiku having a crush on Ayumi, while she has a crush on Conan. This only ever appears a few times in the story, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Oh my god, if I have to say another volume past this one is unskippable, Yeah, this one's entirely unskippable. The reason being the inclusion of another future mainstay of the series, Sonoko Suzuki, aka Conan's second sleeping detective for when Kogoro isn't around. I'd talk about the case she was introduced in, but I'm saving my thoughts for another topic, so I'll move on. The next case is a rather important one, where we see Conan solve a karaoke bar murder as Shinichi, which then carries over to the next case where Conan's mom shows up to take him home. The only problem with this is that Conan has no parents and or relatives, because he doesn't actually exist. So he assumes that his solving of the last case as Shinichi got out despite asking Megure to keep his involvement a secret, leading into this chapter where we're introduced to a new unforeseen member of the Men in Black that poses as Conan's mother in order to isolate him from Ron and Kogoro. Luckily, Conan manages to stay alive long enough to find out that this woman and her partner in crime are meeting with someone they plan to kill, so he heads off to the hotel to stop them from acting out their plan. Volume 6 begins right where the last volume left, with Conan inside the Baker City Hotel, trapped between his kidnappers who are about to begin their meeting. In the end, this all turns out to be a ruse set up by Shinichi's real-life parents, all to convince him to leave the country and let them take care of his case. He refuses, and they take him back to the Moris. The rest of Volume 6 consists of more mandatory cases and optional skips, one with the kids and one with Mori. The next case sees Conan and the kids solving a moving corpse mystery, all with the help of their newly acquired detective badges, marking the official beginning of the Detective Boys, as they prove the existence of the dead body. This is unskippable, mainly because it introduces the badges that become the team's main way of communicating at a distance, and of course, the first instance of the kids referring to themselves as the Detective Boys. The Kogoro case, despite being skippable, is still one I suggest reading, as this marks the start of the second type of case found in the series, the one where we, the reader, know who the murderer is and are waiting for Conan to catch up. And it's a great introduction to this secondary mystery format, clearly inspired by Columbo. And now with Volume 7, we reach what I consider the best standalone case of the series. Invitation to Moonshadow Island. Once again, I'm not going to spoil what happens, so I'll leave it here by labeling this case as non-skippable, since it does get a callback at a later date. Even if I wanted to spoil this one, I can't really think of anything to say other than good mystery. That's it. The rest of Volume 7 is entirely optional, since it contains the conclusion of the last volume's case, along with one where Conan solves a kidnapping case, with the client claiming to be Shinichi's girlfriend. It's a pretty good mystery if you can deal with the misunderstanding element going on at the same time, which is why I'm personally not a big fan of this case. But hey, maybe this might be your cup of tea. It also has this panel of Conan waving goodbye to the kids on their way back home. I just think it's really cute. Oh yeah, this case also introduces the bento box fax machine. This one doesn't get used much at all, and is also kinda lame. Aside from wrapping up the last case, which is optional, the rest of Volume 8 is anything but. We get another Kogoro case, along with a Sonoko case. It's really a 2-in-1 deal. What makes these chapters important is through what happens in each, with Ran and Conan having to juggle with the possibility of someone they know either dying or killing someone. The first case is spent with Conan and the Moris on a vacation Agasa won and gave to them, which puts them in direct contact with a murder that happens in the hotel, with the body dressed up as the Night Baron, a character of Yusaku Kudo's creation. As the case goes on, Conan begins to pinpoint the killer, alongside Ran, who begins to think that Satoru Maeda was the one who did it, which is then resolved after Ran proves that her karate hero wasn't the killer. The second case sees Conan, Ran, and Sonoko attending their junior high school teacher's wedding, and disaster strikes. Thankfully, Conan manages to save Miss Masamoto from dying. Volume 9 is another whole volume with important material, containing the first use of the turbo engine skateboard, and Kogoro's first successful non-sleeping case. Files 1-3 properly introduces the minor plot point of both Genta and Mitsuhiko having that crush on Aoyumi that I mentioned before. I find it funny how one-sided her crush on Conan is, since we already know who he really is and who he has feelings for. I don't have anything else to add, I just think it's a little funny. Aside from that, this case introduces one of my favorite gadgets, the turbo engine skateboard. The single most awesome thing to come out of Detective Conan that doesn't get used a lot in the manga. Like, in the entirety of Detective Conan's 30-year-long run, the skateboard is only ever seen in like 5 cases. Most recent appearance comes from Volume 103 actually, which is a real shame because the skateboard has such a great introduction with this case that follows Conan and the boys as they track down Aoyumi who got stuck inside the trunk of a car. If the turbo engine skateboard didn't exist at all, I don't think I'd unironically consider Conan to be one of the coolest characters ever. Now this case does seem like it'd be fine to skip, but this still needs to be read since the skateboard does get used again in more cases. Eventually. Oh yeah, the Kogoro case in Volume 9 is one that everyone should read, mainly because it contains one of Kogoro Mori's best moments to come out of his character, along with this being the first time that he solves a case on his own, albeit thanks to Conan's hints. But this doesn't come from the lack of sleeping darts. In fact, Conan was just about to put him to sleep, but he knows this is a personal case for Kogoro, so he lets him solve a case, for real this time. And it's honestly one of the best cases in the series, just from these character moments alone. The last chapters see Conan and the Moris attending a client's wedding, which, as we've undoubtedly come to expect, results in murder. This ends up in the optional category, which you might think is kinda strange since one of the victims was Ran, who survives. There's this part where Conan makes sure that Ran is alive, and on her end, she hallucinates Shinichi saving her, and we clearly see that Conan is enraged that the killer dragged her into it. But the former never comes back up again, even during the next time Ran figures out who Conan is. And the latter? Well, we already know that Conan wants to ensure Ran's safety. This is something that has been fully established ever since Chapter 2. I mean, why would Shinichi keep his current dilemma a secret from Ran if he didn't care for her safety? Bottom line is that Conan wants to keep Ran and everyone else around him alive as much as I want to get this video done before 2025, so let's move on to Volume 10. And finally, we reach the very last volume of this video. We start out with the last few chapters of Volume 9's closing case, the introduction of a new detective, Conan's last adventure with the kids, and another optional case. This is where we meet a new reoccurring character who happens to be another detective, Heiji Hattori, one of my favorite characters that isn't Conan, and who's currently looking to challenge Shinichi as Detective of the West. But he ends up joining Kogoro on one of his cases, with a very sickly Conan keeping an eye on Hattori as his condition worsens throughout the investigation. Just as Hattori thinks he has him beaten, Shinichi Kudo suddenly reappears and correctly identifies Isao's murderer, and puts Heiji's made-up competition to rest, moments before he's forced back into the role of Conan Edogawa. A few days later, he identifies an alcoholic drink that caused his sudden transformation back into Shinichi. Beiju? I don't know how to pronounce this, but before he can snag another sip of the liquor, he gets dragged back out with his classmates for one last adventure that houses one of the more creepier culprits found in the series. After they get him arrested, Conan runs back to Agasa's house, taking the Chinese alcohol with him, only to discover that his body has quickly built up an immunity to its effects, resulting in Conan starting the next day with a hangover. Never thought I'd say that. Anyway, this ends what is essentially my first video splicing up Detective Conan for whenever I want to reread the series. And yeah, I know I haven't talked about the last case in Volume 10, but I need something to start the next video with. And since Volume 11 starts off with the conclusion of that case, I might as well talk about it later. Even though I made the guide thing as an excuse to talk about the volumes in varying degrees of depth, I hope I've maybe made the series a little more manageable to read. If not, then oh well. I'll be sure to make another video for volumes 11 through 20 at some point, just don't expect it to be very soon. With that said, follow me on Blue Sky to absolutely tear into my shitty Detective Conan opinions I may or may not post.